Hello there, friends. Welcome to BJJ Meditations. This is BJJ Meditations number 46. I'm your host, Joe Hannon. Joe, the grappler from Jersey. Joe, the guy who is recovering from some strange, mysterious daycare illness once again. Haven't trained in over a week. Let's see, over a week. Last time I trained was last Tuesday. Was in Georgia for a brief family stay, along with some sick children, neither of which were mine. Contracted some gnarly sinus infection. It was just on another plane of existence for about 48 hours. Had an interesting flight back to New Jersey, and now I'm mostly back. Kind of appropriate given the subject of last week's meditation, which was the protocols I use to enhance my jiu-jitsu training and stay healthy, which becomes even harder when you have when you have a child in daycare. Not a whole lot I could have done there to avoid that. And that's something that I've just kind of had to accept as the parent of a small child who is in daycare. Training regularity gets disrupted more frequently than it used to be. That's just something I have to deal with, especially this time of year. Anyway, feeling a little bit better. I haven't trained since last Tuesday, as I said. Tonight will be my first night back. It's a normal night that I teach. It's an advanced no-gi class, which is kind of funny because I don't think my no-gi is that advanced, but it's neither here nor there, I guess. I'm always, anytime I have some extended layoff like this, even if it's something as sort of not serious as like a viral illness like this, I always feel, even now as a black belt, I always feel like I'm going to be left behind, or like I'm at a greater risk of getting hurt or something like that because I haven't practiced as much. And I just don't know if that's something that's ever going to go away, that lingering fear or anxiety. But I will say that one of the best things for it is to just go like right back into it. Like for example, extended layoffs. It's probably like one of the dumber things you can do, but psychologically it's exactly what I've needed when I've been in situations like this. After an extended layoff, my first move back has often been to just like go for an open mat and just train as long as I can, just to kind of get that shock to the system. As soon as I have to bow out, but just to kind of prove to myself that, I can do this again. I can survive. So fortunately, the theme of this month is competition theory. So tonight's class, I've already had like a lot of interesting thoughts. Well, interesting to me anyway. I don't know how interesting the students will find them. Hopefully they will find them interesting and useful, fun, educational. But I've had a lot of interesting thoughts on how to structure class tonight, and I'm very much going to be a participant. So in addition to hopefully communicating some good practical BJJ competition theory, I'll get that shock to the system that I need and, make it out in one piece. But anyway, on to this week's meditation, which we are returning to our original format for this episode, BJJ Meditations. I actually wrote a meditation. That sort of presence of mind or quality of mind mindset is returning to me for whatever reason. I'm in like more of a writing creative mode these days, so hopefully more of that to come. We actually have a written meditation for this episode. It's really short, and Elizabeth Bass is back as the visual collaborator, so be sure to check out the blog post on bjjmeditations.com so you can see her beautiful piece of artwork that she rendered based on this meditation. It'll also be on social media, etc. Elizabeth is back, and definitely show your love for her. She's a big part of what we do here. But anyway, I will read to you this very brief meditation. It's called The Path. There is a path. We choose it. And then there is the path. So, a path, the path. I'm talking about the singularity of focus here. And the path can be whatever you want for the purpose of this podcast and our discussion today, our very one-sided discussion today. It's jiu-jitsu. Many of you are here because, like me, you chose the path of jiu-jitsu. And it's a difficult path, but it's a rewarding path. But chances are, if you're a fan of this podcast, or at least a listener of this podcast, you have a singularity of focus about this path. Some might even call it an obsession. And perhaps that obsession grows stronger, perhaps it grows weaker over time, but it's still a cornerstone aspect of your life. It might even be the basis of your identity or some basis of your identity. It's something I talked about on BJJ Mental Models with Steve Kwan about how I think some of us tend to live what my friend Colin would call, my friend Shane would call small lives. Like jiu-jitsu becomes everything. It becomes all consuming. And I think that while that can be great in some respects, if you want to be an elite level competitor, on the other hand, how many of us can be elite level competitors? How many of us can be world champions? If you're not of that caliber of skill, which takes a lot of work, I think it's attainable for anybody who puts their mind to it. It just takes differing amounts of work to get there. You may be missing out on breadth of experience in your life. So that singularity of focus is not always a wholesome thing. It can be really destructive. I think this is plainly obvious to me when I see people with debilitating injuries who continue to train, never give themselves the time to recover, make themselves worse essentially, and they are essentially 30-year-olds who move around like 60-year-olds. It calls to mind something from like the Reformed Christian doctrine, which I know there are some denominations of Protestantism where combat sports are not okay, essentially because your body is like a temple unto the Lord. And if you're defiling your body, you're defiling the temple. And you can look at defiling your body however you want. You layer any types of Christian values on top of that, whether that be like making yourself a prostitute or willingly letting people beat the shit out of you for fun is a great example too. So some combat sports, boxing, wrestling, these are things that I learned when I was a kid. Like, yeah, some Protestant denominations actually aren't okay with these things. And I think that taking that literally is a bit extreme, but there is an interesting metaphor there we can look at, right? If this vessel is, well, I mean, you don't even have to call it God, capital G. We could say if this vessel is sort of a conduit for God energy, like creative energy, when you abuse it, you are abusing your ability and your soulful nature, I would say, to do good work. So there is something to that logic, but taking it literally, I think, is not always constructive. But anyway, that comes from the singularity of focus. Some of you may have that. What's missing, I think, from this meditation, when I wrote it, I actually wrote it for Elizabeth because she was making a major move to another country and she had chosen this path to go to another country. So a part of it was sort of like an affirmation for her. And then kind of looking at it weeks later, I'm thinking, okay, like where was I coming from when I wrote this? And I think that I wrote it at the time as sort of like a laudatory examination of this choice, this singularity of focus. But now, a few weeks removed, I'm kind of seeing the deficiencies of my thinking. And let me kind of explain what I mean and where that's coming from. I've been reading a lot of Alan Watts lately. The title of the book escapes me, but it's the best book I've ever read about why anxiety is such a problem in modern society, modern Western society, and sort of what the Eastern perspective has to offer on that. And I think this is kind of Watts's power zone, is that he the best authority on Eastern religion and Eastern philosophy? No, I don't think so. I mean, you should probably get this stuff directly from the source because most of it is there from, original thinkers on the material. But I think that Watts is a tremendous conduit for translating these ideas for a Western audience. And the fascinating thing about reading this book was that it was written in the 50s, but it's still extremely relevant today, perhaps more relevant. And I almost wish that Alan were still around to see like, hey, how would you write a new prologue for this book in 2023, given all that's transpired? I mean, a lot has changed in the information landscape since Watts was writing. But anyway, I've been reading a lot of Alan Watts lately, and he talks about this toggling between what he would call like our peripheral vision and the spotlight. And I think the singularity of focus that I was writing about in that meditation is definitely the spotlight. And that spotlight vision, that outlook on the world, is extremely useful. Like, I was talking to my therapist about this the other day, and I gave this example in my conversation. I said to him that I was sharpening broadheads the other day. Broadheads are they're essentially the razor sharp arrow heads that you put on your arrows for deer hunting or for hunting other large game. And they're extremely dangerous, obviously, because they need to be sharp enough to be lethal. So when you're sharpening one of these broadheads, it's clamped inside this aluminum jig, and in my case, I'm using different grits of sandpaper to get them sharp, starting really rough and working my way up to like a finer grit. You really want that spotlight vision when you're working on those broadheads. If you have a wide angle gaze taking in what you're doing, that's a really great recipe for severing one of your digits from your body. Fortunately, this did not happen to me while I was sharpening my broadheads. However, let's say you take that spotlight vision out into the field when you're hunting, and you're just looking at one single solitary patch of the woods, and all around you is this 360 landscape of dense foliage and understory, overstory, game trails. Maybe there's a body of water. You're missing all of this habitat where the deer could be coming from. So there's certainly like a utility to that more relaxed peripheral view. Like, and if you actually feel, you could do this as like an experiment as you're listening to me here. Focus in on something in front of you. Unless you're driving, then don't do this. Just keep driving. But focus in on something in front of you intently. Like right now, I'm looking at the letter H on my keyboard. I can actually feel the I don't know if it's muscle or some other tissue like around my eyes get tense. And then when I take a more wide view here, where I'm not really focusing on anything particular, but I am just kind of taking in everything on the desktop in front of me, I feel all of that tissue around my eyes kind of relax. The eye is changing shape. Probably the pupil is dilating. Somebody could explain this anatomy better than I can, but you can feel it for yourself that there is a change going on there. And I think that that relaxation kind of opens up your field of view more so for opportunity. And Watts even calls this sort of like more of a creative frame of mind, a creative gaze. Like, this is where solutions present themselves rather than going out and sort of banging our heads against the wall, like trying to make something happen. And, I think that this happens to us in jiu-jitsu quite frequently. Like, if you think about, okay, the difference between, let's say somebody is on your back with a rear naked choke that's 80% of the way applied. It's probably a pretty good idea to use that spotlight mode to hand fight and get some sort of space between your throat and whatever limb, is attacking your windpipe or jugular. Yeah, that's wise. You probably don't want to have more of a peripheral or wide angle view there. However, in sort of, let's say a more fast-paced scramble scenario, that peripheral view might be of more service. It might be more beneficial from a perspective of spontaneity. It gets you into position you otherwise didn't see. Or let's say it's the difference between more of a playful sparring session where you're trying to just see what happens, or you're trying to experiment, or you're trying to generate some new sort of technique, versus really trying to hone in on something specific. Each one of these modes of seeing or experiencing has its utility, is the point that I'm trying to make here. Whether I'm making it well or not is to be determined. But it helps to kind of be able to deploy them strategically. And that's kind of like what I'm wrestling with now as I'm thinking about this meditation, and I'm thinking about my jiu-jitsu, and I'm also thinking about like where I'm about to move into a new year. Like, how do I want to oscillate between these two modes of seeing and being in the new year? And it's tough, and I think that one of the challenges that I face, and then perhaps some of you face too, is like if you have experienced significant trauma in your life, any kind of like childhood trauma or anything like that, you may find yourself gravitating more toward that spotlight mode than that peripheral mode, because that's, threat detection. Like, if you are hypersensitive to perceiving threats, you see a threat and bang, your field of view is going to focus on that threat. Like, for example, let's say that you are, let's say you're a deer and you're wandering through the woods, and you're in an area where there are packs of coyotes, and you hear what you think are coyotes running through the underbrush, and you're able to kind of locate the general area where those coyotes are coming from, you are going to be hyper focused on that area for maybe some split second of time before you run away. It would not serve you well from a self-preservation standpoint to go into peripheral mode and like take in the view, right? So I think when you undergo some sort of trauma, you are more likely to find yourself in that spotlight mode where everything is a threat, or where you're trying to detect threats, identify threats for self-preservation standpoint, even though those threats like may not be there. Like if you watch, I like watching like videos of predatory cats on nature channels and stuff like that, because like most of the time they're just lazy, they're basking in the sun, they're asleep, they're at ease, and only are they animated or active like when they're in pursuit of something, when they're in that spotlight mode. And like the funny thing is that prey animals are the same way. Like when you watch deer and they don't know they're being watched, they're very at ease, they're very relaxed, they're just eating, they're enjoying whatever acorns are on the ground or food crop they're browsing. But as soon as they detect a threat, the entire tone of their being changes. They get like tense. You can feel the tension. It's palpable. But they're constantly shifting back and forth because we can't be in that spotlight mode all the time. It's exhausting, both physically and mentally. So I suppose my question is, as I reframe this entire conversation with myself, is like, how do we oscillate between the two? Like, what sorts of modalities can we use from a training standpoint to shift back and forth between them? And then how can we kind of translate that into our daily lives? Like when I think about the outlook for the year ahead, there are certain goals I want to achieve professionally. And if I'm sort of hyper locked into this mode of thinking and being where everything is a threat, like, oh my God, how am I going to hit my target revenue in 2024? I only have X amount of work lined up, and what's going to happen if I don't secure the money that my family needs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, like thinking like that, it makes it even less likely for constructive outcomes to occur. Then you kind of have to put that into proper balance, because sort of the Lord will provide attitude doesn't always work out either. The Lord doesn't always provide. I suppose, some of you may want to debate me on that for theological reasons, but I still think that it helps to have a plan, right? I'm sure Scripture has something to say about that too, the benefits of planning. But hypervigilance has its demerits and takes its toll. So how do we oscillate between the two? I'm thinking about how I might want to structure my jiu-jitsu training a bit more in 2024. And there's definitely this idea of like, okay, focused and peripheral training. Focus training, very scenario specific. Maybe it's gamifying certain positions, probably really crappy positions too. Like I've been thinking about my loss at Masters and how the position I lost from was not a position that I typically train out of. Like this is a thing that happens to you when you become a black belt, in your gym. Most of the other people who like really have my number or give me a hard time are either black belts or like they're black belts and they just don't know it yet. They're a brown belt who's had their brown belt for a while. So, there are like 3 or 4 of them in a given class. You have spirited roles with them. And then everyone else, like you're more so the hammer than the nail, right? So I need to use that spotlight mode to train more scenarios where I'm the nail and how to deal with that. Like, it's going to happen, it's going to happen in competition. And, I need to mentally prepare myself as well as like sharpening my tactics and technical skills in those situations. Or just getting super specific. Like film reveals a lot of technical deficiencies, even as a black belt. Like we all have gaps in our games. Nothing reveals that like watching footage of yourself rolling. Everything feels beautiful and flowy in the moment, but on tape it's slow, and man, do the errors show. So definitely got to be doing a lot more of that for spotlight mode training. And I think, it really, when you get to black belt, people turn to you for feedback a lot, and there's not really as much effort put into receiving feedback. And it does take effort to receive feedback. Like, you often have to ask for it. I find that it's usually only the real problem children who get a ton of attention and a ton of feedback. If you have your your shit together, most of the time, your coach is going to kind of just take a breather on you because they know you have your shit together. So you have to go out and seek it. So it might be more of a matter of me going out and like seeking specific feedback on specific things from specific people. Like, I think as you advance in jiu-jitsu, you begin to realize that like all of your instructors have something to show you, but they don't have everything to show you, and it's up to you really to identify what the gaps are and then go and find the people who can help you close them. And as far as like training in that peripheral mode, I think that comes more naturally to me, ironically, in jiu-jitsu. I think that's why I'm attracted to it so much, is it puts me into this mode of being that I'm not otherwise in. So the real question is like, how do I find that in my personal life? And I think a lot of it is just bringing awareness to the quality of my experience and not trying to repress it so much. I got really good practice at this in Georgia when I was laying in bed with a 102-degree fever and everything in my body hurt. And I was really just trying to like pay attention to the pain, the quality of it, just kind of be like present to it. And not so much. And when I found myself thinking about like, maybe I should take some Tylenol to make this go away, or I really wish this would change, or man, this bed's so uncomfortable, I would kind of just try and bring myself back to feeling the quality of the pain or its characteristics, like almost like describing it to myself. And it certainly like took the intensity out of it. So it's really more of like a meditative practice, I think, in terms of getting that peripheral training in my personal life. But I'd really be curious to know if you guys have any suggestions for how you train that, or what you might think would work for me, or personal experience with using different modalities in that regard. I'm certainly amenable to it. And I do have a meditation practice. I do have a breathwork practice, but I'm curious to know what you do. But yeah, so I think the overall question of like, how do we oscillate between these two modes, this spotlight mode and this peripheral mode? I think the magic in doing it is just being able to do it more mindfully. That's the $1 million question. And I think that's probably going to be my priority as I look ahead to 2024. But I think that just about does it for this week's BJJ Meditations. It's been great talking to you all. Just as a reminder, the new website is up, bjjmeditations.com. That's where you can book an in-person or online coaching session with me. That's the best way to support me. Coaching, we basically use the kind of modalities that I'm talking about here to thematically map your jiu-jitsu training in a way that benefits your personal life, your professional life. We can look for synergies between those two things and construct training plans to address them. And I've worked in the past with clients all over the place. You don't necessarily need to be in the room. You just need to be willing and able to record your rolling, and willing and able to have conversations with me over Zoom. We can make it happen. And this is all informed by my experience. I think I've been doing this for like 6 years now in the peak performance consulting space with Emily Kwok and Josh Waitskin. So that's where that comes from. If you also want to just like offset production costs of the podcast, because it does cost money to produce this podcast, you can make a donation. The Venmo is on the website as well. You can also read the meditations there and sign up to get on the mailing list, which I'm going to be launching in the coming weeks. Check out the highest levels on BJJ Mental Models Premium. That's where I'm doing a monthly podcast with Emily Kwok, where we talk about what works on the highest levels with the elite level performers that we work with in our consulting work, in addition to people like Junior Casio. People are just killing it in jiu-jitsu right now. Finally, like, subscribe, review, and share the podcast wherever you're listening. Could be YouTube, could be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever. Just show us some love there. Follow on Instagram, BJJ_meditations. Check me out on Substack, johannon.substack.com. I have a short story coming out probably next week. It's called Elmo the Gunman, based on a true story. And of course, come and train at Princeton Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. We'd love to see you. We welcome anyone from any and all academies. You can wear whatever gi you want, as long as it's clean. Just don't be smelly. And if you're looking to join, or if you know somebody who's looking to join, we are currently running a special called the 47 Ronin Challenge, 47 Challenge. Our LLC is actually 47 Ronin BJJ. So if you're interested in reading a really cool story, just do a quick Google of 47 Ronin. But yeah, you get 4 classes for $70 plus a free gi. Complete the 4 classes within 2 weeks. We take $70 off your first month's membership. And I think it's a pretty good deal. It's like over $250 in savings or something like that. And yeah, we don't really make any money off that. It's just to kind of offset our cost of onboarding you and to give you like a quality experience. We help you select the right classes to train in. We set you up with our coaches, and we hold your hand along the way, because starting jiu-jitsu can be a fucking scary thing. Most of us got thrown right into the deep end of the pool, and we want to deliver a better experience than most of us had, because that's an important thing to do in this community. But anyway, thank you very much, folks, for listening. Thank you for all your support, and we shall talk soon.